Hello, in this discussion we're going to do things a little backwards. We're going to find the equation given a sinusoidal graph. So this time you're going to give me the graph and we're going to come up with the equation. So typically what you do is they give you the function or the equation and then you graph it. The graph represents the solution. Here, a little backwards. So let's look at this. So we're going to find the equation of this graph right here. Now, we're going to say, well, which one do you have, a sine graph or a cosine graph? Well, let's look at that first of all. Let's look at the amplitude first of all. That's 3. Now, graph the reflected across the x-axis and so if you notice, if you started at 0, it's been reflected across the y-axis at -3. So that's a cosine graph turned upside down. And so this is a cosine graph. So A is -3. So we already know it's going to be y equals -3 times the cosine of omega x. We just don't know what omega is yet. Now omega does something to the period, or how long the cycle is. So we know the period is 2 pi over the absolute value of omega. But period is 8 radians. You're like, it is? Yeah, it is 8 radians. How do you know that? Well, if you notice the graph, at -6, there's an x-intercept. At -6, there's an x-intercept. And then it goes up, down, and then back up. And it hits the x-axis again at 2 units. And you're like, yeah, but that's a sine curve. It doesn't matter. The period for a sine and a cosine will be the same. So if it starts at -6 and it ends at 2, how far are those angles apart? 8 radians. Now the reason I didn't do it started at 0 at -3, because they didn't show me enough of the graph. I mean, typically I would say, well, look at -3 and then go up and then come back down from the y-axis. When does it hit the -3 again? And they cut off part of the graph on the right. So I couldn't really tell you that. So I had to distort it a little bit and come back over here at -6, go up, come back down, go back up again, hit 2 again, the x-intercept, and then start the cycle all over again. So if a period of the sine curve is 8 radians, if it's the same curve on a cosine curve, then it's also 8 radians. So that means what? It is pi over 4. B is pi over 4, or the omega. Sometimes we'll use B. I'm used to using B, but if you set the 2 pi over the omega equal to 8, the omega is pi over 4. So you might want to change that B right there to pi over 4 equals omega, not B. I wrote this up myself, and I use B because that's what I'm used to using. So B equals pi over 4. Change that to omega equals pi over 4. Okay, and then there's your graph equation. Y equals the -3 times the cosine pi over 4, that's omega, times x. So it's quite simple. So you look at for two things, the amplitude first, and just put that number in front. And then you have to figure out what the omega is, and that's determined by the period. And so you got to remember the formula, 2 pi over the absolute value of omega, and see what the period is based on the graph, and it's 8 radians. Set those equal, solve for omega, and that's what you have. So working backwards is not too bad. Okay, you got to look for those 2 items. Okay, that completes this discussion. If you have any questions on it, you let me know, and you have a good day.